Hi, everybody, and welcome to Making a Graphic Novel. I am Alicia Dianne, and thank you for joining me. Today, I'm going to get back to work on Jaydi's story number 2. Prudence is the name of this one. So, I'm going to switch my camera in just a second, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining me, and let's go ahead and get started. Let me try and plug in my phone. So, I'm going to be actually streaming from my phone overhead, and you'll be able to see exactly how I'm working. So let me go ahead and open it up. I'm just gonna set up for just a second so you guys can see my view. So let's see. Okay, let's see if I can stream from the other camera. So let's go ahead and open that up. Let's see. That's not what I want. Let's see. Let me open up the next camera. I think it'll let me, but just a second. Okay. I don't remember how I did the last time. I know that I can do it, but hold on a second. I know. Let's see, camera. Let me see. Alicia's iPhone. There we go. I think. All right. I think it'll show me. And then I gotta put the camera on. So perfect. So this is what I would like to do. Let's see. I'm gonna get my angle right, and hopefully it will let me switch my view. Hold on. This is not the angle I want it to be. Just a second. Sometimes I like try to get my technical difficulties straightened out before, but today, clearly, let me see if I can just do a mirror. Will it let me do that? Screen mirroring. Will it let me? No, that's not what I want. Oh boy. Let me see. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I'm still I'm still trying to figure this out. I might even move my main camera because that's what I've done before in the past. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to figure it out. I think I know what I'm doing. I think I know what I'm doing, but I don't know if I do. Let's see. Camera. Let's see. Let's see if it works this time. I think that's it. Yes, yay, I got it. Oh my gosh. I was like wondering if it was going to work, and I was hoping like please let it work. All right, so this is the view that I want. So perfect, perfect, perfect. All right, so I'm going to go back over there and get started. Let me change my microphone. Sound. Let's see. Let's use my microphone. Okay. All right. So now I am finally in a position where I want to be. Yes. All right. So I'm going to get started. I started this morning, just doing some of the first and a few of them on the second layers of color. At this point, it still looks pretty raw. That's okay. That's just how it looks at this stage. But you'll get to see as I go through. I'll kind of explain a little bit of what I'm doing as I'm going forward, and then we'll talk about some different things today. So I don't know where you're at in your comic making stage. Um, so many people are at different stages and different levels of creating content. Sometimes people are just not really sure what to make. Um, I feel like sometimes a lot of visual artists have a harder time like feeling like they have the writing skills to really come up with a story like this, or like whatever they're wanting to do. Maybe they want to create something but they're not really sure if they have the ability. So I feel like a lot of people get stuck at the concept stage. So like they have an idea of what they want to make, but they maybe think, oh, maybe I don't have enough skills to actually let it happen or to actually create the story. And what I want to encourage you is that there's so much space available for whatever the project is that you have in your mind. And there's so much information that we have now to give us the tools that we need to get the skills that maybe we don't have yet. Like when I first started working on this project, I just did what I knew. I just did character design, and I just came up with the cast essentially, and I wrote like their bios, and I just decided what they look like and who I was gonna base them off of, and kind of decided like their personalities and that sort of thing, because that was what I felt comfortable with. And for the writing stage, I was like, gosh, should I just like hire somebody to do it, because I'm not really sure if I'm capable of writing like a complex story. So it did hold me back for a while, until I started to do some research and then just think, all right, well, what is involved with telling a story? I know I've written stories before, but for me, it was really all very short stories. And I knew a little bit about like plots and things like that, and like, but I didn't have any real confidence in it. So I would just start so what I started to do was I just started like doing some research. Ooh, why do I feel like I can't breathe all of a sudden? Let me open up a window. And I feel like it's kind of like with everything that kind of goes that way. You might feel like you don't have the confidence to keep going or keep moving. But what it takes is just a little bit of energy. It just takes a little bit of wanting to do it. So you just have to find like one good thing to start with. And for me, I found this book, and it was called like Screenwriting for Dummies. I know it's kind of like a silly name, but that's the name of the book that I really started out with. Let me see if I can take the glare, some of this glare out. I don't know if it'll work, but it's a lot of glare from my window. That helps. So I found this book called Screenwriting for Dummies, and I was like, okay, when it comes to writing right now, I do feel like a dummy. So let me just go ahead and read this and see what I find out with. And I learned so much that I just needed to know, and just getting started. Like I had no concept, even though I had taken like some very introductory writing classes while I was in college. I really didn't know anything about outlining or story structure. Just I just had a very limited view of it. I didn't really know what it was involved. And when you don't know what's involved, the whole thing feels very daunting. And I think like that's the case with anything. Like when you don't know what to expect, things can feel really intimidating. And I feel like the more you don't know, it's kind of like that fear of the unknown. It just makes it, when you don't know what you're getting into, everything feels really scary. But once I started learning little by little, it's the whole, I loosened up a lot on the idea of writing my own story. And I loosened up on the idea that I could actually write a good story. Because it just made me feel like, oh, this whole process isn't as scary as I thought. It's actually it's all pretty easy to kind of think about your story in three steps, in three stages, like that beginning, middle, end, that three-act structure that I wasn't familiar with. I started to become much more familiar with, and as I became familiar with it, it became much less intimidating. When I started to look at it as, okay, let me see, what is the end point? And I think that's really a big thing that you need to know when you're getting started. Some visual artists don't realize like how important the ending is. The ending is really your story, and understanding what it is that you want to be your message is a big first step. So if you do know what you want your story to ultimately say, then you're really ahead of the game. Because it's not about coming up with something that is just going to be, or what you think maybe might be a successful story or like a popular thing to write a story about. It's a lot more about understanding or having a message that you want to tell people. It doesn't have to be a huge message. It doesn't have to be the most even inconspicuous message. Maybe it's something that is a common theme, right? It could be something that a lot of people have heard before, but maybe hearing it from you and the take that you have is really what makes it unique and what makes it different. Once you start to understand what it is you want to talk about, then you can start to get into more of the meat of the situation. Like, all right, well, how is it that I want to show this? You know, who is the ideal character to kind of go through this situation and learn these things? And a lot of times you might find that your main character has a lot of similarities to yourself. And I think a lot of people don't make an exact. I think typically when you're writing a story, you don't want the character to be you exactly, but you want it to be like some version of you. It's like a combination of you in in a very like different form, or like what could have been you even, or maybe it was you in just one stage of your life. That's what I kind of noticed with my character that I've written. It's just kind of, she very much reminds me of how I was at a certain stage, and actually in multiple stages. Part of her reminds me of when I was like really young, like middle school age, and then part of her reminds me of a few years ago when I was 30, turning 30, that age. So it doesn't have to be, it's a little bit more flexible than just being just you or just based off of you. It's more like it's a combination. It could be even part you, part your father or your mother or someone in your life that you feel like learned this lesson at some point, or maybe you would really want them to have learned this lesson at some point. And the lesson is what, the moral of your story. Whatever that is. Does every story need a moral? I kind of like to think yes, in some ways, to be meaningful. Or else then, why tell it if there's no point to the story? I feel like stories were, originally made. If you look back on folk tales and different stories that we hear growing up, or even that we hear from other countries, there's always some kind of point or lesson to it. I think that's kind of what makes stories interesting. And I think that's kind of like always been the goal of a story, is to teach us something. So I do think every story should have a moral. I mean, even if you're making like an action movie or like some sort of, all right, this is just me to be a blockbuster hit or something, it doesn't take that much extra intention in the early stages to just say, okay, well, I want this to be the heart of the movie. I mean, you can really do anything. I mean, you can be in space, you can have aliens, whatever, and still be able to have an effective moral to your story that resonates with people. I think it's not about like who the cast is or the setting, so much as it is just about how they react, how they respond to situations that they're in, what they learn from the situations that they're in. I mean, even a end of the world movie, like what comes to mind right now is like The Last of Us. And that's not a movie, that's a series slash also video game. But this even goes to show, like, even a video game should have some sort of a moral to it, because we just naturally engage more when it feels like it gets back past that superficial level. When we actually resonate with the characters and what they're going through, and even though we might not have been through the same thing, we can relate. It makes us care. It makes us care so much more. And those are the type of movies that I think, in stories, stories that become movies, that really last. It wouldn't have been as impactful to see that main character, that male character, and his relationship grow with Ellie. It wouldn't have been as impactful if we didn't see that he lost his only child, who was a daughter at the same age. It wouldn't have been the same impact. It wouldn't have had the same effect on us if he hadn't been through that. Let me close the window again. Boy, these alarms are like, oh, hopefully you can still hear me. Alright, apologize for the interruption there. But it wouldn't have been as impactful. It wouldn't have been nearly as impactful if that main character hadn't had gone through that, loss. And we saw it, and we saw like the relationship building that happened between him and his daughter. Like, we need to see those types of things to care about the progress of the story. And what do I think is the moral to that story? I think it's about really healing. I feel like I've talked about that before. I feel like have I talked about that same character before? I think it's about healing and dealing with loss and dealing with how do you honor someone like who you've lost? Do you hold on to that pain and never let anyone in again, or do you allow it to teach you something? Do you allow it to teach you to appreciate those people more, or to be a mentor figure to someone else, or really like give back, contribute somehow, really step in and care about somebody? Like, so many people who have experienced some sort of pain with either losing a child or not being able to have a child have adopted, and for them it's like they're paying forward that love that they lost or didn't have. They're giving back in some way. They're like using that experience to teach them how to, what's the word that we used to say? They're letting that experience move them to help someone else, or to give love to someone that they might not have otherwise. And that's not the case with every adoption situation, but in some cases it is. And I think it's just, it's good for us to recognize when those types of things happen. Like, what do people really respond to? I think all of these types of things can teach us. I think they all have something to say to us. I'm not sure if this one is dry yet. I don't think so. I'm gonna start adding skin color, I think. I kind of just rotate around which colors I use, which colors I'm adding, just gradually. I just want to... Watercolor is so finicky, like... So, you have to let it fully dry before you add that second layer, and you just about always need a second layer. I think most paints always need a second layer. I'm not sure about oil. I haven't used oil in a while. But watercolor, gouache, acrylic, they all need 2 layers to really, at least 2 layers, to really be their best. But you really gotta make sure that that first layer is dry before you go in. Alright, so where we left off. If you're intimidated about writing, you have a concept, you want to move forward and make it a story, just start to learn a little bit more. One of the things that kind of intimidated me when I started or realized that I wanted to take on writing was the fact that I didn't read a whole lot of stories. And I never really have. I've always watched my stories. I didn't even read a lot of comics growing up, honestly. I really loved movies. Love movies, always. And I was really interested in children's books, and I did read those a bit, but I didn't know I didn't do any extensive reading. I never read like really long fictional books or fictional stories. It just was never like an appealing thing to me to just sit there and read a really long fiction story. So, one thing that you do have to kind of do is to just open yourself up to it. Um, Even if you haven't in the past, you can start. And I know that sounds like really not a fun thing, like, oh, what do you mean start now? But yeah, start now. You don't have to read like a big Harry Potter book in one weekend, but you can find something that seems interesting for you. And one of the things that one of my very short-term mentors, he mentored me for maybe a week or two, told me, he's a screenwriting professor, but he told me like to read screenplays, and it really helps to just read the screenplay, especially if you want to create your story into a screenplay. So I did that. I mean, I was reading my Screenwriting for Dummies book. I was getting advice from a screenwriting professor, and one of the things he told me was to read screenplays. And so I read a few. I didn't read a whole bunch. I didn't read thousands, but I read a few. And I read stories that I already knew. For the most part, I read movies that I really loved. I read Blood Diamond. It's one of my favorite movies. I read a screenplay for that one. What was the other ones I read? My dog just made a real noise. It sounded like a human. It scared me for a second. I read Black Klansman. That was really interesting because I wanted to, see like, gosh, that one sounds like a interesting one to see. And I'd started the movie already, but I read the screenplay, and the screenplay was really good. Like, cause I don't know, you see the jokes differently. You see the bites, like the beats differently. I didn't say sound bites, but kind of like the same thing. You see it differently. I read If Beale Street Could Talk, and I read that one before I saw the movie, and that was the first screenplay that I read before I saw the movie, and I actually enjoyed the screenplay more than the movie. So you can take time and just read a couple. I mean, just pick one screenplay to read, and have a time. I picked a dedicated time in the morning where I would devote just to like getting better at screenwriting. So some days I would write, some days I would read a screenplay, and I would also read my books about screenwriting. And, I had that first book, which I think was the most helpful of them. It helpful for me to start anyway. It really helped me get my grounding in it, but I also found other books after that, I found Save the Cat, which taught me a lot of like good lessons about screenwriting and storytelling, and a lot of things that what you're gonna find too, especially if you're already a movie fan, you're gonna find things that you already know, but you didn't know in an organized way, if that makes sense. Because there's some things that is like, oh, I knew that, but I didn't realize that was a part of the process in writing. And it helps you to really be intentional when you sit down and you start your story, you start your making an outline. And one of the things that I did that really helped me was I looked up the hero's journey and what that entails. So I'm like, okay, hero's journey, what is a hero's journey? And there's all of these steps that the hero has to go through for a traditional hero story. I think the most or one of the most famous hero stories is Star Wars, like the story of Luke, like, the call to adventure. They reject the call at first, and then they meet the mentor, and then they accept the journey. There's like all these stages that your character has to go through in a hero's journey. And so what I did was I took each one of those hero's journeys and I made each one a chapter in my story. So I was like, all right, I'm going to take each step and I make a chapter and I'm write it out like that. So I used it to help me to outline my story first, and then I used it to help me write it, because it gave me a path to move on that made sense for me. It gave me like a strategy to approach a big project that I was like, okay, I'm not really sure where to begin, but this kind of gives me a nice place to go. So I used it to help me, and it really did. It really helped me to organize, all right, what is the order I can use here? What are the steps I can use? I'm hearing these little birds, and I'm not sure where they're coming from. But it really gave me a nice path to follow, especially if you're not sure, like, if you feel insecure or unsure where to start, man, have an outline. Just find like the simplest tutorial for how to create an outline and just have all those plot points. And that's the biggest thing, because then it's just like you're filling in the details. Then it's just like, all right, well, what are the lessons, what are the little things that I want my character to learn along the way? But it makes everything it just makes it make so much more sense. So much more sense. Right, what can I fill in next? I'm trying to go in a strategic way, since I'm using this watercolor, that I can put a layer, let it dry, paint something else while that layer is drying. So I'm gonna go, let's see, one's her. I think I'm using this color. And I can probably put that second coat on there, on the reds too. But everything has to dry in its own time. This is what it looks like when it's done. This is one of my pages. So there is a method to my madness. Once it's all done and colored, it does look pretty nice and clean. And I put each watercolor page into this binder where I can keep, all the sheets protected and everything. But in this stage, it's still pretty just raw. And that's okay with me, because I know where it's leading up to. But I feel like with every type of paint, it goes through like these stages, and one of these stages feels like it's like an ugly phase. And I definitely go through that with my paintings. They definitely all go through like their ugly phase, which I guess it's I would say yes, it's an ugly phase right now. But you have to love your paintings like at every stage, because you have to know like that it's not ready yet. It's just like a baby that's not, developed yet. You can't really judge it, because you know that it's, if you're the parent, you know that it's not ready. It's like if you look at a sonogram picture, it doesn't even look like a human. It looks like there's some kind of alien in there. But the mom knows that, it's only because the baby's not ready yet. So you don't love the baby less because it's only 2 months old in the womb. You just know that it's not fully cooked yet. And same with painting. It's not fully cooked yet. And the artist knows. The artist mom knows it's not ready yet. You just have to keep loving it through every stage. Alrighty. I'm going to start filling in her shirt too. I think I'm going to use this lighter blue. I have so many colors in this comic. It's ridiculous. It feels like totally incohesive at this stage, but it's just because it's new. I mean, if you've been seeing like some of my older videos, then you might remember when that I've said before that I tried initially, or like at some stage, to paint this comic digitally. And watercolor is really not a popular medium for comics. I think I've seen it, I've specifically looked it up. I think I've seen it once, maybe twice, but it's really not a popular medium to use for comics. I mean, it seems impractical. I mean, I'll give it that. I mean, I'll give people that. It seems like the logical thing is to work digitally. And I do enjoy digital. At the same time, with coloring, I feel like I'm still getting my footing with digital. And especially when I first started this comic, the digital that I made was not the look I wanted. And I was confused about it, and I was frustrated about it. And honestly, at that point, I didn't even enjoy painting digitally that much. I was frustrated by, I didn't like sitting, how I was behind the desk like I was. It wasn't the right thing for me at that time. And I'm glad because I feel like watercolor really feels to me like that's the right choice for this project. I feel like so many projects are going to have their own look, their own feel. They might all be different, but I think it's okay to work with different mediums for different projects. Like, it's okay to work digital in one and then in watercolor in another and maybe pastel in a different one. I think it depends on the feel that you want. And for me, for this project, it felt like the feel that I wanted to get was all in the watercolor. Then I saw it, I'm like, all right, this is what I want this comic to look like. And I wasn't sure at first because I was like experimenting with digital. I liked the way other people did digital, but the way I did digital didn't look like how I wanted. It just didn't have the feeling that I wanted. And I put the whole thing away for a while. I didn't, I finished the line work, but didn't do the color phase yet, and I wasn't sure how I was going to approach it. And I looked back on all the work I'd done, and I just saw how the watercolor looked, and I just was like, that's the feeling I want. That's it. So you may want to experiment depending on what your comic is. Don't just assume immediately that it has to be done digital, because you may find that you like something else better if you give it a chance. You may find that might be a better fit style-wise for what you're going for. As I feel like different stories and different themes lend themselves to different mediums. And I just like the idea too that you can have different stories. I don't know, it's kind of fun to have a library of different works that are all kind of mixed in the media. I don't know. I think it adds a different element. I think it adds a little bit more excitement, honestly, too. And it can be more exciting for the artist as well. Like if you have one medium that you really enjoy working in, even if it's like a phase, then maybe that's a phase that you want to use for this project that you're thinking about doing. So don't feel like you're tied to only do digital, or like people will only want your work if it's digital, because artists work in all different mediums. And I know that tradition, like really with cartooning, it seems like it's all gone to digital, but maybe you want to try doing your entire comic with marker. Like there's a comic that I like that all the inking is done in marker. It's colored traditionally. I mean, it's colored digitally, but all the inking. Actually, there's more than one actually that I really like, where all the inking is done traditionally, and then it's colored digital. So you might just want to experiment, is all. Because, and I would get some advice too. While I was in my different stages working on this project, I was in grad school too, and I got a lot of good advice. A lot that I didn't want to hear necessarily at first. One of those things was that I really needed to work on my storytelling. But you know, hearing that feedback is what made me go and get that advice from a screenwriting professor, and that's what made me go and start reading screenplays and reading about screenwriting. Because first I didn't pay as I just, I wasn't really sure where to go on my own. But getting that advice and getting that feedback is what really pushed me to go ahead and learn what I needed to know. And that was really the best thing I could have done, was to go back and learn. Because we just don't know what we don't know. And that's it. I mean, we just don't. And I did get feedback on the medium too. I wasn't sure if I was going to listen. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to make your own decision. And I wasn't sure if I was going to listen to anybody on the medium, but it did help me, like, think about it. Like someone said, just like, watercolor, that's you. Like, that's your thing. Like, that's where I see you shine. And, I wasn't sure if I wanted to follow that person's advice right away, because I wasn't sure, like, if I fully trusted their advice. But I think that in some ways it did help me to at least be open-minded. Because I didn't think that, the watercolor was relevant enough or good enough or modern enough. But it helped me to be open-minded to, like, well, maybe watercolor will work for me. Maybe it is okay to do a comic in watercolor. And here I am. And I think it's the right choice for this project. I don't know that I would do a different series in watercolor, but I think for this one, this is what feels right. It's a lot of water you go through, a lot of brush cleaning, a lot of frustration sometimes when I have to, like, clean out my palette whenever the paint gets gunky or old. Like I have like one of my pans is like, it's open so I can put the top back on it, but sometimes I'll forget to put the top back on it. paint gets dry and then it's ruined, or well, not as ruined immediately, but it gets cakey after a while, you know, and you have to wash it out and replace it. So I mean, it is a lot more finicky than it would have been if I was working digitally, but the benefits is I get this look that I really want, which works for this project. Let's see. There were some other things I wanted to talk about today. I don't know if I'm able to get to everything I wanted to talk about, but I think I'll just keep going today as far as, like, you know, the storytelling, because I think that that I want to give you as much as I can for that. Find people and find video channels that correlate to writing as well. It really helps. I listen to a lot of videos too. Film Courage is a really great resource. It really helps me a lot to hear the interviews and just all the great information they have on there about screenwriting and, like, mistakes to avoid, because that's a really great thing too. It's like just learning what not to do, because you don't automatically know that, or you might be walking right into it, because some things that, you know, you don't even think about. One of the things that I almost made the mistake of doing was making my character design, particularly the costume design, really generic and really plain. I was just going to give my main character, like, a white t-shirt and jeans. And then I watched this video that says, don't make your character with a white t-shirt and jeans. And I was like, how did they know I was going to do that? But apparently it's a pitfall that a lot of people make when they're creating a cast. They maybe just want your character to be relatable, and you're just, you know, thinking that they're just casual, but then it's like, it's overly simplified. But doing just a little bit of research to, like, alright, well, you know, what is the country that this character's from? What is the city? What things do they wear traditionally? What things are in style? Colors, you know, colors, the greatest advice that I ever heard about colors for character design, especially like costume design, is like looking at nature. And that's what I based almost all of my costuming on, was different animal patterns from the country that my story is based on, which is Kenya. So I found, like, these different birds and all of the crazy colors they had, all these beautiful colors that they had, and used that as a jumping off point for the color designs and the color patterns that I was using. And that was really, really helpful, because initially, if I would have just done my initial thing, it would have been, it just would have been a lot less interesting. And I think little things, like, or seemingly little things, like the color of your character's outfit, all of that plays into the bigger picture. All of that plays into, like, the ultimate quality of your entire story. I think it all makes a difference. Especially, it adds up. You might not realize it at first how much it matters, but when you put everything together and you see how cohesive or not things are, then you're like, wow, it really made a difference for me to pay attention to the colors of my characters, costumes, and everything else. That really made a difference somehow. So we gotta pay attention to those types of things. All these colors need 2 layers, just about. So I'll go ahead and add little by little. I mean, it seems very tedious, but what I really enjoy about watercolor is it's really relaxing. Like, there's something very meditative about it, where it doesn't really feel like work. Sometimes it just kind of feels like you can get lost in it. You can also in digital, like I've noticed that I'm starting to get that way digital, but it wasn't that way for me before. Like, I'm learning as I get more comfortable with it. I guess that's really the trick. Is the more comfortable you get with it, the more natural it feels. And then you can just kind of get into this phase of just like a flow stage. Like, you can really get into that flow and just not really worry so much about, you're not worried about the outcome. You know the outcome will come, but in the meantime, it just feels like it just doesn't feel like, takes away the nerves, takes away the pressure, and it just feels like relaxing. What you want it to be relaxing. If I could give you an advice too, is to choose a medium that feels relaxing for you, because if you're going to work on something that's going to take you hours and hours and years, over a period of years to complete, you don't want it to be stressful, trust me. You do not want it to be a stressful process. You want it to be as painless as humanly possible. So pick a medium that doesn't feel painful. I mean, it sounds simple enough, but if something is a pain in the butt for you to work with, then don't use it for comic. My God, you'll never finish, because it will just be too daunting for you. You'll procrastinate it like hell. I mean, you already will gonna procrastinate just because of the sheer time that it takes. I noticed that, like, when things take a long time, you know it's gonna take a long time. That's one of the triggers for procrastination. It's like your body. The reason why we procrastinate at all is to avoid pain. I think one of the painful things that we do is doing something that we know is gonna take a long time. It's just naturally, I think our body is just designed to like try to avoid things that we know it's gonna take a long time to finish. So, please, pick something that's not painful for you. I realized when I was doing the first layer that I used the wrong color brown for Jaydi for her first layer. So, I used the regular brown instead of her particular brown. So I'm using her brown for the second coat. It's okay. I mean, that's what's really going to show. As long as at least it's a close enough color to the original, to what her color is, but yeah, she does have a different color brown. I'm using like just 3 or 4 different browns. Most of the characters are the same brown, just because of the the browns that we have available are like, alright, I'm not gonna mix like 50 different browns. Just trying to make the characters different enough in their personality and what they wear to hopefully vary it up a bit, but you know, you have a town and most everybody is the same ethnicity, then you don't want to spend too much. Oh, I put the wrong color on her. That's not her color. Oh well. It's okay. You see, I started talking and then I lost my thought. It's okay. I put the wrong brown on her, but it's okay. It doesn't. It's just little subtle things that I want it to be different. It's just subtle differences, you know. Like she's a bit more chocolatey than most. Like it's a different hue. And I want her to stand out as she is the main character and as a main character should. I was doing all these different studies too to like you see once you finish your story, then you can start to focus on like the little things which can be kind of fun and entertaining like for yourself personally. Like for me, one of the things that's kind of entertaining that I noticed was all the different studies that I got to do about goats because I was going to originally use the goat species that I originally used to design Atsuki, Jaydi's goat, is a seinen goat. Until I saw a seinen goat in person, because I was volunteering at a zoo and I saw a seinen goat, and I was like, that goat is humongous. It was like huge, and I was like, that's definitely not the right goat. And then the keeper told me, oh yeah, well, seinen goats are known as like the Great Danes of the goat community. I was like, oh, okay, that's something I didn't know before. So I started doing different. So I started doing different studies on other types of goats that she could be. This goat could be. She was like a medium-sized goat. I was thinking maybe it could be a Nigerian dwarf goat, or maybe it could be a Nubian goat. And I was like looking at, and I learned about all these goats. I didn't even know there were so many different types of goats. But I mean, that's the fun thing is that you learn about different random things. Like if you have a goat in your comic, which I doubt you do, but you'll learn like, you know, it'll make you looking at all the details, all the things that you might not even think about otherwise. You're gonna start to recognize and look into. I think I finally settled on a Bowen goat, and I don't know if I can show you what a Bowen goat looks like, but maybe I can really quick. I think I finally settled on a goat species because I was trying to find a species with the right ear size and the right height, and I wanted to make sure they have enough horns because Atsuki has like really big horns. So anyway, let me see if I can quickly show you guys. Oh, maybe it's a bower. I think I said it wrong before. Here it is. It's a bower goat. Bower. Anyway, this is a goat. And I'm so glad that I know all about these goats now. Because now I'm like, oh my god. Like, that's Atsuki right there. That's exactly like her. Even has horns and everything. Has the brown ears. I was like, oh my gosh, and the white body, that's perfect. That's the goat that Jaydi has right there. Alright, now I'm going to stop sharing and change my view. And let's go into my other camera. Okay. Well, today was interesting. Technical difficulties abound, but thank you for sticking out with me, for watching this channel, and for learning a little bit about the storytelling process. I mean, storytelling is such an interesting subject that really never gets old, and really we can never cover too much. So I'm glad that we talked about it today. Thank you so much for watching this channel with me, and just sticking with me this afternoon. Until I see you next time, be grateful, live balanced, and be yourself. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.